Does it work? Okay. So this session will be slightly different than the previous ones because we actually don't have demos. The features that we're presenting are purely internal features of the platform, especially this one, network parameters in transactions. So I will try to give a little introduction why we decided to do that. During implementation of more intricate features of Corda, especially the things that Tutor did, like whitelisted contract implementations, package ownership, we realized that actually transaction validity depends on the network parameters that were enforced in the network in that point of time. So if we get historical transactions for resolution in a chain, and we will keep using current parameters, it might turn out that the transaction is no longer valid. Because, for example, we removed the notaries, changed transaction size, and as I mentioned before, there were changes to whitelisted contract implementations or package ownership. So this feature is entirely hidden from the developers. So the platform takes care of all of it automatically. So what I did, I had to add additional fields on the wire transaction types. There are different wire transaction types. It's like also contract upgrade and notary change transaction. So this additional field is the hash of the parameters that were used during the transaction creation, and it's also taken care of automatically during the building the transaction. So there is not much impact to the end users. And then this hash has to be resolved somehow to the parameters. And we have 3 ways of resolving it. So each node caches the parameters that it has seen in the local network parameters storage. So it's in the database. And we store the signed network parameters because we need to ensure that these are like valid network parameters come from the operator. The second path of resolution of the parameters. So if we see a hash that we've never seen before, we can query network map. Network map has endpoints for the hashes of parameters, and we can download them from the network map. And the last way is through fetch parameters flow. It is also internal flow. And it's similar to fetch attachment flow, but it works only for nodes that are on version 4 or higher. So we also need to ensure that when we construct the transaction with given parameters, that these parameters are indeed parameters in the network. This is a little problematic. I will come back to this later. Initial implementation was that notaries were checking this thing. Now we changed that because it needs more thinking, and notaries right now check only that there are network parameters attached. Both validating and non-validating notaries, so network parameters are also unfiltered transactions always for the notaries. And there are some problems, of course. For example, we have transactions that come from the nodes from older versions that are in the chain. Clearly, there won't be network parameters. So we resolve them to null, like our resolution. And when we see such a transaction, this will be resolved to default network parameters. So we need this notion because of this older transaction, and this default network parameters kind of need yet to be defined because they are dependent on the notaries and whitelist contract and packaging ownership. Okay, so additional feature that we had to introduce was the non-downgrade rule for transaction chain validation. It means that network parameters have inside the number, which is an epoch. And when we create new network parameters, this epoch increases. So we make sure when we resolve the chain of the transactions that the epochs in the chain, they always increase, because there might be an attack that, for example, we remove a notary from the network parameters, but this notary creates a transaction with itself, like with the old parameters. So they cannot be injected in this chain. And the only thing that is still unresolved is that we have, when we change network parameters, we do flag day, and the network propagation is delayed, so we end up with nodes with different network parameters in the network. So we probably introduce, but later, some kind of notion of like a time interval where both parameters can be enforced in the network, so notaries won't reject transactions with the older ones. That's it. Any questions?
I had a couple. First one is, just occurred to me, have we documented that the network map is expected to serve these things? Because obviously we have people using our docs to build their own network maps and doormen. Do they know they need to do this? So
in the network map, we always had endpoints for serving the network parameters by hash. I'm not sure if we are stating explicitly that it should be served, but then also it's taken care of in this fetch parameters flow. So you could actually fetch the parameters from the peer, and you fetch signed parameters.
Okay, that's so it's invisible. And the second question was, you say this is not a user visible feature, but I can imagine some people, let's imagine they've got quite complicated vaults, or they've merged from one subzone to another. They may want to be able to query a transaction in the vault or a state and know which parameters are associated with it. Is there an RPC or something they can use to say, for this transaction or this state, show me the parameters of the covenant?
So I didn't change any vault query features. There's no API for finding out.
There's no. So if somebody needed to know this, is there anything they can do? Let's imagine support to get a query about this, and customers are getting weird questions about, getting a weird error that the transaction's got the wrong network parameters and they don't know what's happened. Is there a way to debug it, or do we need to add something in the future today?
So I'm not sure. Maybe someone knows better than me, but I think when you query for the transactions, it actually shows the fields in the transactions. So you'll see the hash of the parameters.
And then you can use that to go get the parameters. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I think when you do a bulk query via the shell run. Sorry. Thanks. Thanks, Richard. If you do a bulk query via the shell, I'm pretty sure it returns the network parameters in the metadata associated with the state.
Because I think it's quite dumb. It's just like iterates through the fields in the object, and so it should show network parameters. Yeah.
I have a general question. In the scenario where there's a failure, like an entity is running a server behind a DNS name, and that particular server fails, and they need to do a DNS change, which could take up to 24 to 48 hours globally. Are we in a situation that company won't be able to transact with Corda until that DNS is fully propagated? Or do we have an alternative way that they can copy network parameters or something? I'm just trying to think how we bring them back online quickly.
I'm not sure how it's related to this feature. honestly.
Yeah, it may not it's something that's coming to mind. Maybe we can take it offline separately, but I mean, network parameters seems to bind in transactions and basically comes down to a DNS name or IP address and port inside of a file that's hashed.
No, there is no such thing in network parameters.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Wrong question.
Everything is in node info. Network parameters have identities and some like message size, contracts, whitelist, this kind of stuff.
Oh, okay. So the identity is not actually even associated at all with the network parameters. It's completely different.
So identity is the name and public key of the notary, and that's the only thing that is stored in network parameters.
Name and public key.
X500 name.
Oh, okay. Not the location of the.
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next feature. Ollie.
So I'm going to talk about auto acceptance of network parameters. So just to give you a refresher on how network parameters are currently updated. So there's 4 main steps. First, the network operator, so the person in charge of the network map and the doorman, has to issue a parameter update. This will basically advertise to all the nodes on the network what is going to change, when it will change. At this point, the parameters won't actually change. It's just letting everyone know. Step 2, so in the process between them issuing the update and the actual deadline, the node operator should use the shell or the logs to inspect the update, so to see what's actually changed. This gives them a chance to go back to the operator and say whether they agree or discuss it, whatever they want to do. And then they have to manually accept the network parameters by logging into the shell and executing this run accept new network parameters command. And then after the deadline is passed, the operator will issue a flag day, the network map will roll over the parameters, and then at that point, all the nodes will have to restart. The ones that have accepted will just have to restart. It will shut down and they can just restart as normal. The ones that haven't accepted will be kicked off, and if they try and restart, they'll get met with an error saying you have to accept these. The auto acceptance feature is a fairly small change. Basically negates the need for an operator to, a node operator, sorry, to manually inspect them and run this accept command. So for certain changes, you've got them listed at the bottom there. So for whitelisted contract implementations and package ownership changes, these will just automatically be accepted. So that step 2 is kind of removed from the update process. This behavior is completely configurable, so you can turn off auto acceptance if you want to inspect every single change. And then you can also toggle individual ones if you want. So if you want to inspect every package ownership change and you don't want any accepted by default, you can just turn off that one. I put modified time and epoch there. So if for some strange reason a parameter change set only included them, then it would be accepted, but that would never happen, really. Also, one thing to note with the configuration is that although you can toggle individual parameters, you can't switch on auto acceptance for any that are not listed at the bottom there. So, for example, the more important things like max message size and the list of notaries, you can't, that's built into the code. So you can't just add a configuration option to switch on auto acceptance for notaries. One big point about this, to remove any confusion, that flag days and node restarts have not been removed. This is kind of so the network parameter update process works in a certain way, and this is on the Corda node side and has not changed that. Every single change to the network parameters requires broadcasting of an update and a flag day. And then also, there is no hot swapping of network parameters. So when a flag day occurs, all nodes will shut down. As before, though, nodes that have accepted can just be restarted, and nodes that are not accepted will just get kicked off. So yeah, this isn't magic. Nodes will continue working as normal, if anyone thought that previously. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The previous slide was the bulk of the work. So yeah, any questions?
What's the point of this feature if not allow me to continue running? What's the point of the feature if I need to restart the node anyway? Sorry?
Don't you have a script monitoring the node that is turned off and restarts? It's pretty basic.
You know, I might not want to auto-restart my node. I might need to provide some passwords or something like that, which I do. It's in a different way.
Unlikely that will work monitoring the node.
But yeah, no, you're right. This is a small change. Like the whole rigmarole of a network parameter update still exists. So there's still some work around that.
No question, or we can move on.
It's also worth pointing out that what is a network parameters update? It's the moral equivalent of a hard fork in Bitcoin or Ethereum. It's a big deal. So yes, it would be nice if we could automatically reconfigure the node for some of these parameters. And I think there's actually work scheduled off the back of the offside to look at how we do that for some of them. But even being able to remove one of these steps, so it's just a restart rather than an accept and then a restart, seems like a step forward. But I know there's a lot of controversy around network parameters and flag days. But all consensus networks have them. It's the equivalent of a hard fork. It's unavoidable, but we need to do them as rarely as possible.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The next topic is much better because it doesn't involve any node restarts. So I'm going to tell you everything about minimum and target platform version. Those are attributes of CorDapps. So CorDapps can now specify a minimum platform version and a target platform version. Yeah, but right now this feature isn't really used that much. It's more about making life easier in the future. The minimum platform version is a simpler one. It basically just says that a node must have at least this version in order to run this CorDapp. So if your CorDapp has minimum platform version 8 and a node running Corda platform version 5 tries to load it, it will see that the platform version is too high and it just will refuse to load the Corda. Yeah, the reasoning behind this is that you may want to take advantage of new APIs that were added in later versions, and I mean, sometimes you can kind of version guard it, and you can check from inside the CorDapp what version the node is running on, and then you can say, okay, if it's lower than the version that introduced this particular feature, then to do something else, and then if it has the right version, then proceed normally. But there can be situations where you can't do that, and where you just can't
make your CorDapp work on Corda version 3. And then you set the minimum platform version. Yeah. This one doesn't have to be set. It just defaults to 1 if you don't set it. The target platform version is slightly more complicated, but not much. It just means that that's the version of the platform that your app was tested against, and it basically says that if a node can run your CorDapp at this API level, then it should. Yeah. So imagine you have a node running Corda version 7, and it encounters a CorDapp with a target version 6. Then the node will attempt to run at this API level. And what that means basically is that we want to have the ability to change the API in the future without breaking older CorDapps. And in order to do that, we need to know this target version of the CorDapp we are running. And currently there's only 2 usages in the platform of this target version. I think one is in the finality flow, and platform developers should use this judiciously. So we don't want to use this a lot. It's just sometimes we might have to, and then it's really good to have this functionality. Yeah. The way it works for developers of CorDapps is that in your CorDapp configuration, you set these 2 values. As I said, the minimum platform version is optional, and then the CorDapp Gradle plugin takes care of everything else, and that's it really. Yeah, this is all described in the docs in the versioning section, by the way. Yeah. Yeah, that's it really.
Florian, are there any examples in the code base where the node changes behavior based on target platform version? In other words, is this a forward-looking feature, or do we actually adjust our behavior based on this right now?
Right now, there are only 2 places. One is in the finality flow, and the other one is in the transaction builder. It's something about flattened commands that were introduced in Corda 4, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So you were talking about the minimum platform version in CorDapp configuration, right? There is a minimum platform version in the network parameters as well. How do they play together?
Those are different concepts. The one in the network parameters just says that there shouldn't be any nodes in this network that are below this version.
Right, so that's strictly the Corda version and not related to the CorDapp at all, is it?
No.
Question. I believe there's also a concept of a CorDapp version ID. I think that's used when it comes to signature constraints. Is it used for anything else, or what is the long-term plan for CorDapp version ID?
The Corda,
I think it's in this so what you've got there, I think there will be one more line. I may be mistaken.
Yeah,
There should be one more line, something CorDapp version ID, and I think it's used together with signature constraints because you want to make sure that someone is not giving you an older version of the CorDapp, which makes a lot of sense. But is it broader than that? Like that's the one use case I can think of. But is it used somewhere else also, the CorDapp version ID, or is it just the signature constraints check?
I can't really tell you because I didn't work on that. Yeah, Tudor should be able to.
Thanks.
All my notes.
When people release new versions of the same CorDapp, then they increment the version. That's how it's supposed to work. So you fix a bug, you release a new version, you increment the version field. But we're not really using it now in anywhere. So yeah.
So it's not used. Okay.
Yes, but it was supposed to be used for non-downgrade.
Yeah.
So we came out with an older version, but we somehow diverted that. So yeah.
Okay, so at the moment I would be able to downgrade. Nothing's going to stop me from that.
Well, if you add new fields, then there's a no data loss rule.
Uh-huh.
You cannot lose fields. You cannot lose data from between transactions, basically. So once you add a new field or transaction, you cannot use an older version that loses the data. But other than that, yeah.
Just ask a question on that, Tudor. I think I was reviewing a bug yesterday where it may be user error, where if you have two CorDapps with the same version, the node will throw an error and say, this is not allowed, which made me think there's probably a documented best practice, which is whenever you release a new version of a CorDapp, you must increment the version. Is that right?
Well, if it's not, we should write this document, yeah. But if it's not written, we should write it, yeah, definitely, yeah.
If there are no more questions, I think we can stop it here. So thanks Florian, thanks Kasia, thanks Oli for today's presentation. Thank you.